The so-called normal days are the ones you really need to watch out for. They're when you're most likely to be caught off guard, hit hard, or completely thrown off balance. It's similar to the old saying that the quiet ones are the ones to be wary of because they're usually the wildest at heart. Both of these pieces of wisdom came to light for me, Alan Webb. I married my childhood sweetheart, Ellie, almost immediately after we both graduated from university and secured good jobs. I became a teacher at a local junior school, while Ellie worked as a nursing sister at a private hospital nearby. We had solid careers with stability and security. With a reliable income, the banks were more than willing to lend us the money for our first home. Soon after, our children were born, James, now 14, and Elaine, now 19, who are the pride of our lives. They seemed destined for a bright future, with close-knit friendships, good grades, and just enough sibling rivalry to give Ellie and me many moments of quiet laughter at their antics. The relationship between Ellie and me was stable, though not particularly passionate. We had occasional arguments, mostly about the kids. She was always very protective of them, and found it difficult when I had to enforce rules or address issues that naturally arise while raising two children. She would argue up to a certain point and then suddenly change the subject, which became a pattern. Our intimacy life was satisfactory, with us having intimacy 2 to 3 times a week, usually on the weekends when she was more open to it. I would have preferred more frequency during the week, but Ellie often came up with excuses. I eventually accepted that it was better to wait for the weekends. Our intimicial encounters weren't what I'd call making love. They were more about satisfying a need, especially on my part. I tried to introduce more variety and excitement into our intimacy life, but it never really took off. We settled into a routine and stuck with it. Despite this, I couldn't complain. Ellie was incredibly attractive to me, and we had 2 wonderful kids to raise. The sense of peaceful routine began to unravel one Thursday. It was lunchtime in the staff room. I taught at a junior school, which was connected to a large senior school campus. This meant that junior school teachers shared a staff room with senior school teachers, many of whom I became quite friendly with. On this particular lunchtime, one of the rare occasions when I wasn't on playground duty or buried in marking, Pat Collins, the head of science at the senior school, approached me with a proposal. "Hey Al, could you help a team of my Year 12 science students test out a new, cutting-edge piece of equipment?" Always eager to assist, but cautious of potential pranks, I responded, "Sure, Pat. Are you testing the size of the human brain and need to calibrate the machine for the largest sample first?" He laughed. "No, nothing that simple. We've been loaned a basic DNA sampling unit from the university. It's specifically for this group of Year 12 students who have been identified by the university's scouts as exceptional, and they're being fast-tracked into the science course next year. It's quite a privilege, as far as I know. It's the first time this has happened." "Okay," I said. "But why do you need my help?" My curiosity was piqued. "Well, we need subjects to test the DNA samples on. For child safety reasons, we can't use any students or staff from here. We need random subjects that the team or the university can't trace. Could you help out? You can't tell me who the subjects are, but one of them must be related to a parent and the other must not be. It will be up to the science students to determine, using the DNA unit, which is which. I could use my own kids, but I might accidentally give the students hints. All we need is 3 strands of hair, one from the parent, one from the related child, and one from the unrelated child. Are you in?" He looked at me expectantly while I hesitated. "You'd be doing these students a huge favor. Opportunities like this don't come around often." "Why not?" I agreed, already deciding to use my own children as the subjects, though I didn't share that with Pat. He handed me the special containers to prevent any cross-contamination of the samples. "Why are you giving me 6 containers?" I asked. "Just in case you mess up any of the samples," he replied. "Right. Like junior teachers don't know anything, huh?" I retorted, continuing the friendly banter between us. Thursday night was ideal for the sampling to take place. Ellie wasn't home since she had a late shift. I could only imagine how she would react to her kids being used in a science experiment. Elaine had a friend over for the night as well, a longtime friend named Patsy Jefferson. We knew her parents, John and Shelley, from our university days, and often met with them socially. I always enjoyed being around Shelley. She was open and kind-hearted. John, on the other hand, while friendly and conversational, always seemed a bit reserved. I often caught him giving me a look that I couldn't quite place, but it carried a certain smugness, as if he knew something I didn't. But everyone is different, and Ellie loved being around them. Collecting the hair samples was easier than I anticipated. Mine was obviously the simplest, and getting Elaine's was just a matter of going to the bathroom and pulling one from the hairbrush in her cabinet. Each of us had our own cabinet in the bathroom, and Elaine always used her own brush, as did Ellie. Patsy's hair sample fell into my lap purely by chance. The two girls were horsing around in the lounge during a study break when Patsy tripped near the dining table and got her shoulder-length hair caught in one of the chairs. Elaine was rolling on the floor with laughter as Patsy tried to untangle the mess from all the nooks and crannies in the chair. She eventually succeeded, but it left a few tiny tufts of her hair in the chair. Bingo, sample number 3 was done. I then went to James's bedroom and plucked a hair from his pillow. Of course, he had no idea what I was doing since he was listening to music in the den at the time. I now had 4 samples, mine, 2 related samples, Elaine and James, and 1 unrelated sample, Patsy. I still had 2 empty containers and hadn't mixed up the other samples, so just for fun, I included one of Ellie's hairs, also from her hairbrush. This should be interesting. I labeled them all scientifically as AE and recorded whose sample was which. A was mine, B and C were Elaine and James, D was Patsy, and E was Ellie. I couldn't wait to see the results. It would definitely test the team's accuracy and give them valuable diagnostic experience before their university entrance. The next day, I handed the samples to Pat. He was surprised by the extra 2 samples, but mentioned that it would make the testing more realistic. Since it was a Friday, I wasn't expecting any immediate results, so I carried on with my usual routine for the next week. Then, in the staff room, Pat approached me again. "Hey, Al, the team got the results back. They're thrilled. The university mentors were very impressed with how they conducted the activity and how the DNA unit performed in relatively untrained hands. I can tell you, this group of students has a bright future in science next year. It was a good idea to give them 5 samples. It really challenged them. Anyway, here's the report. I don't want to know who they are or where they came from, but thanks again." I waited until I got home to open the brown envelope, as I had an entire afternoon dedicated to preparing for my Year 6 class. The report was fairly straightforward. It began by outlining the method used to determine the DNA sequences for each sample. Then, it presented a simple table illustrating the familial connections between the samples. A is not related to any of the other samples. E is related to samples B and C. D is related to samples B and C. E is not related to sample D. The report then stated that the results had been thoroughly verified by the university DNA lab, with a very low likelihood of error. It also included praise for the Year 12 students who conducted the activity, commending them on the high degree of accuracy they achieved. In fact, the letter declared, the results are absolutely correct in every aspect. It didn't hit me until I reread the report. My hands started to tremble as the implications of the results struck me hard. It was like being blindsided by a punch. The results meant that I, sample A, was not related to my own children, samples B and C. This couldn't be true. I was their father. But Ellie was related to them. And then there was Patsy. How could she be related to Elaine and James? The reality of these results was unbearable. My mind went into overdrive, jumping from one thought to another, unable to focus on the one undeniable fact. I had been deceived throughout my entire marriage. "No, no, no, Ellie, no!" I shouted into the empty house. Thankfully, no one was home yet. The emptiness of the house suddenly seemed to close in on me as I spun around and collapsed, fainting on the kitchen floor. Dad! Dad, are you okay? What happened? Elaine's voice pierced through the fog in my mind, jolting me back to consciousness. I think so, I mumbled. My eyes were barely open, and all I could make out was a blurry image of my daughter, Elaine, looking deeply concerned. Or was she my daughter? The awful realization hit me again, and I quickly sat up, trying to shake off the dizziness. As I ran my hand over my head, I felt a bump where my skull had cushioned the fall to the floor. Ouch! I couldn't help but cry out as I noticed my hand was smeared with blood. Elaine was immediately by my side with a cloth, some ice, and a cool drink of water. I muttered my thanks as I sipped the water and pressed the ice to the injury. Sorry, I said. I don't know what happened. I was just reading this report, and the next thing I knew, you were calling my name. I must have slipped or something. I think I'll be fine in a minute. I'll go down to the den and rest a bit. James and your mum will be home soon. Do you think you can take care of dinner? Of course, Dad, Elaine replied. You really scared me, you know. I thought you had a heart attack or something. CPR was about to be my next move. All that PE training at school was finally going to pay off. She chuckled. I love you. Now go and rest. Those words struck me harder than any heart attack could. Elaine was my daughter, but she wasn't. I loved her deeply, and she loved me as her dad. But I wasn't her dad. I was just the fool who paid for her upbringing, comforted her when she cried, listened to her teenage rants and tantrums, changed her diapers in the middle of the night, and kissed her on the cheek as she left for school each morning. But I wasn't her dad. The DNA test had made that painfully clear, and the wound it left wasn't a black eye, it was a broken heart. The lounge chair in the den caught me as I sank into it, needing to sit and think. Think about what? About how Ellie had betrayed me not just once, but twice. And if twice, how many more times? The two clear instances of cheating happened years apart. But what about the time in between, before or after? Is it still happening now? How could Ellie do this? She was my wife, my love, my partner. We did everything together, and people often commented on what a strong partnership we had, or at least appeared to have. We rarely fought, and we always made time for intimacy whenever we could, though it was less frequent now as we got older, and mostly on weekends. Plus, having teenagers around doesn't allow for much loud, carefree time. As I sat there, I unintentionally repeated the word how out loud, not realizing that Elaine had come down into the den with a cup of coffee for me. I don't know how either, Dad, she said, thinking I was talking to her. I couldn't find anything you could have tripped on, and the floor is dry so you didn't slip on anything. I found this, by the way. You must have been reading it when you walked into the kitchen, some kind of science report. You really should do your marking at your desk, Dad. With that little scolding, she handed me my coffee. Bless her, and the crumpled report. Damn her. Thanks for both, Lainey, I replied, using my pet name for her when she scolded me. She smiled and left the room to continue with dinner. I had to pull myself together before I could think logically about the situation and figure out what was really going on. If I continued like this and made a mistake, I would have already damaged my relationships with Ellie and my kids. My kids? Ellie had clearly cheated on me with John Jefferson, not just once, but at least twice. My hands started to shake again. I couldn't let my emotions take over. I needed to control them and my outward behavior immediately. Thankfully, as a teacher, I was used to managing both, especially when dealing with the overly enthusiastic parents who enroll their kids in my classes every year. By the time I finished my coffee and felt the ice dripping down my face, I had managed to compartmentalize everything. Just in time, too, as James and Ellie walked through the door. Are you okay, Dad? James asked. Feeling your age? Maybe we should get you a wheelchair, he joked as he came over to check the cut on my head. That's gotta hurt, he quipped again before heading to his room. What happened, Al? Ellie asked as she inspected the wound from a purely medical perspective. No stitches needed, but you'll need to keep that ice on for a while. What was Elaine thinking using one of my good tea towels for this? I'll have to treat it to get the blood out. I'll be right back with another cloth and some fresh ice. She breezed out to take care of the new bandage. I was proud of myself for staying in control, though each time she touched the wound, I flinched slightly, not from the pain, but from the betrayal that now seemed obvious to me. Of course, Ellie thought I was just reacting to the pain. "Don't be such a wimp," she teased as I tried to pull away from her touch. "Come on up for dinner. I need a shower. Elaine has been cooking up a storm for her poor, injured dad." She laughed. I didn't join in as I trudged up the stairs to sit at the table with my family. My family? That lie was tainting every thought now. I nearly lost it. Thankfully, everyone chalked up my odd behavior to my recent fall and joked about it. Later, as I made my way to bed, I realized I had survived my first day of deceit. I could do this. As a teacher, I had a set number of days each year that could be used as sick days. Given the intense stress of teaching, these days could also serve as mental health days, a benefit of being part of a unionized workforce. I decided to meet with the junior principal to arrange a week off from class. She was familiar with my track record and could tell right away that my request was for something serious. "This is a bit unexpected, Al. Is there anything I should be aware of?" she asked, pausing for a response. "I'd rather not discuss it right now, boss. I just need some time alone at home to sort out some serious issues. In my current state of mind, I won't be doing my students any favors. Take it easy, Al. I know your work ethic, and I trust that you're not just slacking off. I hope your time off is productive. I'll arrange for a substitute teacher to cover your class for the week. Just leave your lesson plans on your desk for them." That weekend felt surreal. I kept up normal conversation around the house, but managed to spend as much time away from Ellie as possible, pretending to be busy with various tasks around the yard that just had to get done. Mealtimes were the hardest. Usually a time for light family chatter, I had to really focus on contributing to the conversation. I couldn't bring myself to look Ellie in the eyes at all. I forced a smile here and there and carried on. My heart broke repeatedly as I watched and listened to James and Elaine. Nights were easier to escape to, as I would retire early, blaming all the yard work and the need to recover from my fall. Ellie didn't seem bothered by my lack of interest in intimacy over the weekend. In fact, perhaps it was just my paranoia, but I think she even tried to hide a sigh of relief. On Monday morning, I followed my usual workday routine. Ellie was working day shifts for the week, so she'd be away during my regular school hours. James was at school as usual, and Elaine had a full week of studying at university. Essentially, I would be at school while the rest of the family went about their day. This provided me with a perfect opportunity to investigate anything I needed to. My analytical mindset kicked in, and I quickly compiled a list of items to check. 1. Examine Ellie's personal belongings for any clues about who, when, where, or why. 2. Investigate Ellie's activities at work. If something was happening, it would likely be related to her job since she never went out for girls' nights or social events alone. 3. Purchase a tracking device for Ellie's car. 4. Look into John Jefferson's movements. 5. Consult a lawyer to explore my options. The first task was relatively straightforward now that I had access to the house. I meticulously searched everything: Ellie's wardrobe, bedside table, and even the attic. I couldn't find anything incriminating. However, I did notice one odd detail. A photo album in the den had been removed and replaced multiple times, evident from the absence of dust on a particular album. I observed this as I sat in my usual chair, sipping coffee and contemplating where to search next. Out of curiosity, I pulled the clean album from the shelf. Since no one had looked at the photo albums in a while, I was eager to see why this one had been so recently disturbed. I was stunned by the contents. The album appeared to be a tribute to John, featuring photos of him from university and even some intimate shots of him with Ellie, clearly taken while they were at university. I thought, okay, university is a wild time for many, but keeping such explicit photos? I also recalled that we had promised to be exclusive during our university courtship. Something felt off. There were photos of him holding Elaine as a baby. What really disgusted me was a picture of him, Ellie, and Elaine in the hospital shortly after Elaine was born, a typical happy family snapshot. This sequence continued chronologically with similar photos featuring James. There were more happy family pictures of them all together at various locations, many of which were places we had visited together. The photos must have been taken while I was preoccupied with something else. I didn't recall any of them being taken when I was within earshot or sight. The photos certainly didn't appear on the kitchen table for everyone to see after the events. The pictures not taken in familiar social settings seemed to be from local hospital areas. Ellie almost always appeared in her hospital scrubs, but a few showed her in very revealing outfits. Normally, this would have been a point of pride for me. Ellie was always attractive, and when she dressed up, she could turn heads even now. But instead of pride, I felt a deep sense of betrayal. She wasn't dressing up for me. She was trying to impress John, that jerk John. I could now understand the furtive glances and knowing smiles whenever we socialized as a group. I could almost hear John thinking, that poor clueless guy doesn't have a clue about Ellie and me hooking up at will. He doesn't even know about our two love children. My mind slipped into a different realm at that moment. It felt as if I was no longer in reality, but rather in a movie. Everything I had taken for granted no longer seemed real. No marriage, no children, no family. It's astonishing how quickly a lifetime of love for someone special can dissolve into hatred. That's what happened in this alternate reality. I was aware that I could easily sink into despair and give up, but I knew I wouldn't. I had plans to make. That single photo album unleashed all the love I had for Ellie, which spilled out and was left on the floor of the den. I scanned all the photos and stored them in a password-protected folder on my computer. Now, it was time to move on to the second item on my list. By now, it was 11 o'clock, and I knew Ellie had her lunch break at noon every day. I had enough time to get to her hospital and observe her. I brought my camera with a telephoto lens, just in case. Parking was easy at that hour, and I was fortunate to find a spot near the back of the lot, out of casual view from the hospital's main entrance, but still allowing me to watch it. At 11:55, I saw John walk into the hospital, looking confident, as if he'd done this many times before. At 12:05, Ellie emerged. Nothing unusual, except she was arm in arm with John. At that moment, my love for Ellie transformed into intense anger. Anger at both her and John. My camera almost acted on its own, rapidly taking shots of the two of them leaving the hospital and heading toward Ellie's car, which, fortunately, wasn't near mine. They kissed as they got into the car, and she drove off. I followed them at a safe distance. They weren't expecting anyone to be following them. No sudden turns or cautious glances behind. They'd been getting away with this for too long, so neither of them had any reason to believe they weren't free to do as they pleased. They assumed that poor, clueless me was at work as usual. Why would they worry? The car pulled up to a hotel-motel near the hospital. It was one of those places where hospital patients and visiting relatives from other cities were mainly served. They almost ran out of the car and headed to the emergency room, from where it seemed they could go straight to their room. The receptionist, handing over the key, just waved them through. When they disappeared into the elevator, I went into the reception area, pretending to look through the documents, and casually mentioning to the receptionist that the last couple seemed to be in a hurry. Her answer stung me more than I expected. It hurt so much that I was sure I would lose control and scream at the top of my voice. She said, "Oh yes, they are regular customers. They come in 4 times a week. Isn't it cute that a married couple is still doing this after all these years?" My mind screamed, "A married couple? She should be married to me. The receptionist continued. I've worked here for 15 years, and it's been the same every week. From Monday to Thursday, like clockwork. Even when Elsie was pregnant, she and James still came here. They usually stayed for about an hour and a half each time. Interestingly, they never come during the school holidays. So, would you like to rent a room? No thanks. I was just looking for places where representatives of my company could be accommodated. Thank you. Somehow I managed to say it before I stumbled back to my car. And indeed, a little over an hour later, the couple lazily wandered to their car, munching on sandwiches. I knew Ellie well enough to know from the look on her face and the way she moved that she had just had a good rest. My camera captured the evidence again. It took all my self-control not to jump out of the car and attack them. That's how I think about them now. They drove away, and I stayed stunned in the hotel parking lot. The secretary noticed me and waved a friendly hand. She must have had a lunch break. I believe she was friendly with a potential future client. She even came up to me to ask if I had any more questions about the hotel's services. I shook my head politely, thanked her, and drove away. When I got home, I added the photos to my folder and moved on to the next task on my list. And it was only Monday. I found a discreet GPS tracking device for sale at a local store after searching online. It was already 2 p.m., so I had just enough time to buy it and get home by my usual arrival time. $200 later, I had the device and a small instruction manual. I was back home by 3:30, sitting at my desk pretending to grade papers, when Elaine burst through the door. "Hi, Dad! I'm home. No more accidents today, I hope?" She laughed, before disappearing into her room. The usual afternoon routine began. James showed up around 4 p.m., with Ellie heading to the ensuite shower. By 5, I was preparing dinner, which was ready by 6, and we were all eating at the table by 6:30. The conversation was the typical small talk and gossip until it was time to wrap up for the night. Ellie seemed her usual self. She had been hiding her affair for so long that it was just part of her day. There were no signs of guilt or remorse. I went to bed early, pretending to be exhausted from the particularly challenging class I had this year. My family was used to these moments and didn't question my early departure. It was a restless night that led to an early morning for me. After some coffee and a quick face wash, I was awake enough to place the tracker in Ellie's car and set up the tracking app on my computer. After calibrating the settings, I made breakfast and got ready as if it were a regular school day. By 9 a.m., I was alone again, ready to complete my plan. The tracker would confirm Ellie's movements and provide evidence of her trips to and from the hospital. I didn't need to track John's whereabouts. I already knew what he and Ellie had been up to, so item 5 it was. Searching for local divorce lawyers on Google was a real eye-opener. There were endless pages of them. I picked one at random and called to see if they had an appointment available today. They did. At 11 o'clock, I found myself nervously sitting in a small waiting room where a conservatively dressed secretary was busily typing away at a computer. At 11:15, I was called in and led to an office that could only be described as a relic from a bygone era, filled with polished wood and floor-to-ceiling shelves packed with leather-bound books. The smell was incredible. The room seemed to radiate knowledge and history. "Hi, Mr. Webb. May I call you Al?" Before I could even respond, she continued. "I'm Jane Lober, divorce attorney. How can I assist you, Al?" I gathered my thoughts and poured out everything that had happened in the past few days. It wasn't until later that I realized tears were streaming down my face uncontrollably. This was the first time I had acknowledged aloud what was happening to me, the first time I had spoken to anyone about it. Jane handed me tissues, which she seemed to have an endless supply of, while she took notes. Aside from the occasional, or okay, she stayed quiet as I unloaded my story. When I finished, there was an uncomfortable pause. I blew my nose while Jane appeared to review her notes. "Well, Al, that's quite a story. I assume you have evidence of all this?" Jane asked. The look she gave me, head down and eyes peering over the top of her reading glasses, reminded me of my school days in the principal's office. I listed the photographic evidence I had managed to gather so far. I didn't mention the GPS tracker, fearing she might tell me it was illegal and inadmissible in court. "All right," Jane said. "It's clear that you have grounds to sue John for the unpaid child support over the years. You could also sue for alienation of affection, but you'd need to prove that he somehow forced Ellie into the relationship. Based on what you've told me, that seems unlikely. Regarding you and Ellie, divorce seems to be the likely outcome from what you've shared. However, you need to understand that having affairs is not illegal. The vows you made at your wedding are not legally binding. If you proceed with the divorce, you'll be treated as equal partners. Your wife's infidelity won't impact the financial settlement. Since both of you work and have similar incomes, child support considerations would likely cancel each other out. Elaine is 19, so she's not a factor in this. James is a different matter, and how his living arrangements are determined will influence the financial aspects. The house's value would be split 70-30 in favor of the parent who gets custody of James. Any cash and other assets will be divided according to the court's decision. It's not an easy process. Are you sure this is the path you want to take?" She looked at me over her glasses again. I paused to reflect on everything I had learned in the past few days. The DNA results, the love letters, the hotel. "Yes, absolutely," I replied. "All right then. I'll prepare the necessary paperwork and have it ready for signing by Thursday. Once it's signed, you'll just need to decide when you want Ellie and John to be served. Fax, text, or email, all the relevant financial information listed in this brochure to my secretary. I'll see you on Thursday, Al. Don't do anything rash or illegal, and we'll get the process started." She stood up and gestured toward the door. Before I knew it, I was back in the waiting room, looking at 3 other people who were also waiting nervously. At least I'm not alone, I remember thinking. But that was a mistake. I was utterly alone in this. Who could I confide in? Ellie? She had always been my confidant during difficult times. Elaine? James? How could I shatter their trust and belief so harshly? It would hurt them as much, if not more, than it would hurt me. And what about John's family? Patsy and her mother, Shelley, would be heartbroken to learn of Ellie's and John's affair. Doubts began to erode my previous determination. Could I really bring pain to so many people? If I did nothing, the only one affected would be me. Could I live with that? I wandered home and found myself in the den again, lost in thought. To act or not to act? That was the question. I grimly smiled at the Shakespearean reference. There was little, if any, happiness in this entire situation. I needed a drink. Normally, I wouldn't drink alone, but the large glass of red wine provided a strange comfort. Was wine the only solace I would find? This was a downward spiral, and I knew it. I put the bottle away, but kept the glass. It took me 2 hours, until 3 in the afternoon to be exact, to finish the glass of wine and make my decision. I hid my solo drinking and started preparing dinner before the others arrived. Ellie, with her usual cheerful greeting, dashed to her room for a shower, followed by James and Ellie. "James, don't leave your school bag in my car, please," Ellie shouted as she made her way to our ensuite. Of course, I thought. Ellie always showers as soon as she gets home from work. Her excuse was that she didn't want to bring home any germs from the hospital to us, the innocent family members. I now knew with certainty that it was to erase any evidence of their encounters. And the name James, that was the name John used at the hotel. These realizations only strengthened my resolve. I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I was up early. I went straight to Ellie's car and removed the GPS tracker. I no longer needed it. The data from the previous day confirmed that Ellie had been following her usual cheating routine. I also tampered with the car's electrical system to ensure it wouldn't start. Afterward, I returned to the kitchen, made breakfast as usual, and observed the regular morning routine. "Come on, James," Ellie called out. "We need to leave. I have to be on time for work." I couldn't help but think, off to meet your other partner, you really mean. They both headed to the garage as usual, but, strangely, the car wouldn't start. "Al, the car won't start. Can you come take a look at it, please?" Ellie asked. I strolled down without rushing. After lifting the hood, I pretended to inspect the cables, telling Ellie to try it now, or what about now? "Sorry, Elle. Looks like you'll have to take the bus today with James. I could give you a ride, but I have a staff meeting before school." I lied. Ellie was displeased, but she knew that if she didn't start walking to the bus stop now, she'd have to wait another 30 minutes. James wasn't thrilled either. Taking the bus to school wasn't cool at all. At least the bus stopped right outside their stops, so the rest of the trip would be relatively painless. They left, grumbling, James about the uncool ride to school, and Ellie, while not voicing it, was likely brooding over missing out on her usual affair with the jerk. How are they going to get to their love nest without the car? Well, tough luck for her, I thought. I went back inside, saw Elaine off, and cleaned up. I had someone to meet. Shelley was taken aback to see me at her door at 9:30. "Al, what a surprise. Aren't you supposed to be at school?" She laughed at her own comment. "Listen to me. I sound like a school mom checking up on a truant teenager. Sorry. Come in. Where's Ellie?" She was clearly puzzled by the unexpected visit, but was very gracious. We moved to the back where our families had spent many enjoyable times together, BBQing and having drinks. "Would you like some coffee?" she asked, as I settled into a patio chair. "Sure. Thanks." Soon she returned with 2 steaming mugs and placed them on the small table between our chairs. "All right, Al, spill it. Why are you here on a school day and without Ellie?" She could sense that something was off. Women and their intuition. "Shelley, what I have to say isn't pleasant. I debated whether to even tell you, but you know me. I believe in doing the right thing." Shelley grew paler as I spoke, but she didn't interrupt. "I won't sugarcoat anything, so here it is." I explained what I had discovered, how I found out, and the current state of Ellie's relationship with John. Suddenly she stopped, waved her hands in despair, and began to cry. Embarrassed, she stood up and went inside. Shortly she returned with a large box of tissues, 2 bottles of red wine, and 2 glasses. "Forget the coffee, Al. I need this. The other bottle is for you, but if you don't drink it, I will. Your call." I poured the wine into our glasses. "Now tell me again what those bastards have been doing." I repeated what I knew. "That's it," she whispered. "The lying, cheating bastard is done. The divorce papers will be prepared today." She went back inside and made a phone call. When she came out, she said, "A school friend of mine is a divorce lawyer. She's very busy, but she can see me at 2 this afternoon. I might need copies of that photographic evidence you have." Shelley looked at me with swollen red eyes. "I don't understand, Al. Why did you come to me before confronting Ellie?" I looked at her with empathy, understanding what she was going through. "I was on my way to Shell's place, consumed with rage and eager for revenge. My plan was to shock and awe as a means of getting back at everyone. But doubts started creeping in. The pain this situation was causing you, me, and soon our children was almost unbearable. No, it's better that you handle John first, claim what you're owed, and then I'll deal with him. I don't want to strip him of everything and leave you and Patsy with nothing. That wouldn't be right." I paused, noticing that this reasoning was making sense to her. "Oh, Al, you've always been the good guy. How could Ellie do this to you, and John do this to me and Patsy, and for so long? You must feel awful, like dirt. I know I do." With that, she came over and gave me a tight hug. "We're both going to need some sympathetic shoulders to cry on as we get through this." The hug was warm and friendly, but not romantic. We sat there, hugging and crying uncontrollably into each other's shoulders. I was acutely aware that this was the first genuine human contact I'd had since this whole ordeal began, and it felt comforting. The wine was forgotten as we basked in the closeness. We both needed it. I'm not sure how long we stayed like that, but eventually we naturally parted. "I'll handle Patsy," Shelley said. "I won't go into graphic detail about who John was cheating with, but I'll provide enough information to make it clear that his infidelity was long-term. I won't risk your plans by revealing that I know it was Ellie. That should be enough to create uncertainty and stress for her." I left Shelley's place feeling much more assured about my plan. Let Shelley deal with John first, secure her share of their joint assets and alimony, without making it obvious who he was unfaithful with. This should also give me the time I need to prepare my next steps. Shelley's lawyer clearly knew their business. John was served the very next day at work, in a very public manner. As his co-workers gathered for a staff meeting, the court representative called for him loudly and abruptly. Perhaps he shouldn't have done it, but after announcing, "You are served," he added, "Your wife cannot live with a man who has had a long-term affair with another married woman who has had 2 children by you." Amidst the gasps and uproar, the server vanished. He was well compensated for delivering that extra detail. Fortunately, given the breach of decorum, he might not receive another task like that for a while. John was treated like a pariah at work. Normally, friendly colleagues would physically move away if he sat near them. No one spoke to him unless it was work-related. His boss summoned him to his office and reprimanded him for his lack of moral ethics, questioning why he should remain employed with the company given his poor judgment and reliability. His boss, married for 45 years, struggled to hide his disdain for someone who so easily betrayed their marital vows. He informed John that he would be dismissed as soon as his divorce was finalized, giving John 2 months to find another job, a nearly impossible task in an area where gossip thrived. Things were very different at the Webb house. For some inexplicable reason, repairing Ellie's car took an unusually long time. Every week, a mechanic called and explained the delay with some technical reasons. As a result, Ellie was forced to use the local bus service. This situation also led to increased tension in her relationship with John. For a couple accustomed to regular intimate moments without stress, their attempts to meet during lunch breaks have become fraught with difficulties. They couldn't use their regular hotel as the receptionist called John and informed him that their regular reservation would be canceled due to their frequent absences. As a result, their secret rendezvous had to be moved to the hospital's back rooms. These rooms were cramped, filled with various chemical odors, and posed a danger that they would be disturbed by repairmen. One day, a contract employee unexpectedly came to them in the midst of an intimate moment. He quickly closed the door, but soon returned with a recording of the phone conversation. He shot 30 seconds of video footage, which clearly shows their faces. Realizing that they were being filmed, John and Ellie hurriedly dispersed, while John could clearly be heard leaving. They quickly left the warehouse, vowing never to return. Although the video went to different contacts, somehow it never got to Ellie or John's phones, but it ended up on mine. It was immediately added to my fraud folder. At home, I kept up a cool, casual demeanor. Fortunately, our routines had long been established, so maintaining the illusion of normalcy was easier than I had anticipated. The only noticeable change was the complete absence of any physical or intimate interaction between Ellie and me. I wondered why Ellie hadn't mentioned this shift in our relationship, but it was clear her mind was too preoccupied with the situation between Shelley and John. Ellie was always on edge, likely due to the risky and infrequent encounters with John during work. She must have wondered how no one had discovered that she was the other married woman mentioned in the divorce papers. Maybe she chalked it up to luck. Occasionally, she'd stay late at work, citing overtime. I knew she was using that time to meet John somewhere. Although inside I was seething with rage, I managed to conceal my contempt for Ellie beneath a veneer of normalcy. Elaine had a suspicion that something was amiss and confronted me about it one day in the kitchen while I was making dinner. Ellie and James weren't home yet. "Dad, is everything okay with you and Mum?" I can't help but notice that you two aren't acting like yourselves. Mum is always on edge, and you're acting so normal it's almost weird. I mean, look at what's happening with Patsy's parents. I'd hate for something like that to happen to you guys. Their divorce is going to be finalized next week. Patsy is a mess, crying all the time. Her dad is hardly ever home anymore, and their house is being sold. Patsy told me her dad has been having an affair for years and has 2 other kids with another married woman. Who does that, Dad? I looked at her. Good old Lainey, I thought. A woman's intuition is alive and well in a teenage head. I responded as calmly as possible. Of course, Lainey. You know every couple has its ups and downs, right? If there's ever something you need to worry about, I'll be the first to tell you. Now, don't you have a room to rush to, like you usually do at this time of day? She walked away, but I knew I'd eventually have to tell her about her true parentage. It was a conversation I wasn't looking forward to. How do you tell a girl who's been your daughter for the past 19 years that she's really not? Shelley and John's divorce was indeed going to be finalized next week. I knew this because I had been keeping in close contact with Shelley. Her lawyer had informed her that she was likely to receive 80% of the marital assets, which would leave her in a strong position to start a new life. It was remarkable how the process had progressed without anyone revealing the identity of the other woman. This was crucial to my plan. The day finally arrived when John and Shelley were officially divorced. The house was sold, and Shelley relocated to a neighboring town, settling into a new job and a home that suited her as a single mother with a teenage daughter. Patsy, her daughter, accepted the situation and often spent nights at Elaine's place. Patsy seemed to rely heavily on Elaine for support and was also very attached to her mother. Whenever Shelley wasn't home when Patsy returned, she would immediately call to find out where she was. Shelley and I continued to meet occasionally for friendly chats. Our mutual support helped us navigate the storm of deceit with relative calm. Meanwhile, the man who caused all this turmoil lost his job as expected and ended up finding some low-paying temporary work. Now, it was my turn to unleash the truth. Ellie came home from work that Wednesday afternoon, as usual. She was heading upstairs to take a shower when I called out to her, "Ellie, I know what you and John have been doing." Her reaction was priceless. Ellie literally froze mid-step on the stairs. She slowly turned towards me, clutching the railing for support. Her face turned pale, and she almost stumbled. "What? What do you mean?" she stammered. I wasn't going to be gentle. The anger I had suppressed for so long erupted. I said, "I know that you and John have been having an affair behind my back for at least 19 years, I shouted. Fortunately, Elaine and James were out doing some sports activities. For our entire marriage, you have betrayed me with another man, had 2 of his children, and deceived me into believing they were ours. The disrespect and deceit you've shown me are beyond comprehension. I'm not even going to ask why because no answer would satisfy me. I've known about your affair for the past 3.5 months. Just so you know, you'll be served with divorce papers here tonight at exactly 8 o'clock. I chose that time because your children, Elaine and James, will be here then, probably finishing dinner. A dinner that I've prepared as usual. I'll be leaving shortly. My things are packed in the car. I don't expect to return to this den of deceit again. If you need to contact me, do it through my lawyer. Their number is on the divorce papers. James and Elaine will likely look forward to your explanation of what you've been doing all these years. I had hoped to be the one to tell them what's been going on between you and John, and what it means for them, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. If I did, I know I would lose control and probably say and do things that would scar those 2 wonderful kids for life. No, you started this mess. Now you can clean it up. I can't bear to witness the hurt and betrayal that's about to befall James and Elaine. I shouted the entire statement. It helped to release some of the anger. Ellie just collapsed onto the steps. She kept moaning, "No, no," over and over, but I felt no sympathy for her. Instead, I turned towards the kitchen and continued preparing dinner for James, Elaine, and her. I remained unusually calm as I set the table and placed 2 envelopes, one for James and one for Elaine, at their usual spots. The letters inside each envelope were identical. They read, "Dear James, Elaine, it breaks my heart to put you in this situation. Please believe me when I say that if there had been any other way, one where you wouldn't have to share in my pain and humiliation, I would have taken it. Know that I love you both with all my heart, a love that fills my entire being. I've loved you from the moment you were born and have always tried to help you grow into the wonderful people you are. If you need to talk to me, and I sincerely hope you do, my new number is 0223-786-712. Please don't share this number with your mother, as I can't bear to have anything to do with her. I hope the explanation she gives you doesn't break your heart as it did mine. Again, I love you unconditionally. Dad." I struggled for a long time with saying goodbye. Although I wasn't their biological father, I couldn't deny that I had been their dad in every way that mattered throughout their lives. Fighting back tears and quietly sobbing, I left the kitchen and headed to the garage. Ellie was still on the stairs, her head in her hands. To me, she was no longer alive, but I hoped she would finally be honest with James and Elaine. Now it was her turn to face the consequences of all the pain and sorrow she and John had caused. I drove to the small house I had rented and prepared the week before. There was space for Elaine and James if they chose to join me, but I wouldn't force them. That decision was ultimately theirs. As I drove, tears streamed down my face, and I was genuinely worried about getting into an accident, but I made it safely. When I turned the key to what would be my home now and for the foreseeable future, I heard a voice behind me. "Thought you might like some company, especially tonight." It was Shelley. Good old Shelley, my rock and support through these awful months. I collapsed into her arms, and we revisited the emotional breakdown that had begun at her house 3 months earlier. All the bottled-up emotions, anger, hatred, disbelief, self-doubt, questioning, came pouring out, leaving me a trembling mess. My incoherent ramblings must have sounded odd to Shelley, but she gently guided me into the house, settled me on the couch, and continued to hold me. I had no idea how much time passed before I could finally string together 2 sensible words. When I could speak, I whispered, "Thanks, Shelley." But she wouldn't let me say anything more. She placed a hand over my mouth, signaling me to be quiet, while her other hand began loosening my trousers. My eyes widened in protest, but she just hushed and soothed me. "Relax, Al. It's been building up for a long time." By that time, my trousers were down. It's been a long time since I've had intimacy, and I've been avoiding Ellie ever since I found out about her infidelity. Shelley seemed to sense this and slowed down a little. She managed to say, "Al, I want you to enjoy this as much as I like to give you pleasure." Then she resumed her work. It was a beautiful night. When I woke up, I found myself lying on the couch with the amazing Shelley next to me. "Hello, Sonia." I decided to make us comfortable. "No need to ask if you liked it. I'm glad I can still satisfy you." Her laugh was full of energy, and I knew what was going to happen next. "Aha, sir. I see I haven't lost my grip. I suggest moving from this second-hand living room to my much more comfortable second-hand bed," I suggested. We both quickly agreed and moved to the bed. That night will stay with me forever, and I can confidently say that with Shelley too. We were as close as rabbits every moment we were awake. I do not know at what time we fell asleep, but I do know that at 7 o'clock the next morning we were woken up by 2 phone calls demanding attention. My call was from Elaine, and Shelley's was from Patsy. They've both been trying to contact us since last night. I answered mine. "Lainey, how are you, my love?" The sobbing on the phone told me everything I needed to know. "I love you, Lainey. Please know this. I will always love you no matter what." Her sobs subsided. "Dad, I love you. I feel so sorry for you because of what Mom did. I don't know what to think yet. Part of me sees my mother as she has always been, The other sees her as a liar who has been deceiving everyone who loved her all her life. Can I see you? Where do you live now? Am I still going to be your daughter? I love you so much. I couldn't stand that you weren't there. James wants to see you too. Can we come right now? She sobbed into the phone. I calmed her down and promised that I would pick them both up within an hour. I didn't tell Elaine about it, but Shelley and I needed to clean up something. Patsy also wanted to see her mom and was very worried that she hadn't been home all night. I picked up James and Shelley outside our old house, both carrying knapsacks and pillows. "What's with the camping gear?" I asked, trying to lighten the mood. They both had red eyes and clearly hadn't slept well. James replied, "We can't stay there," pointing at the house. Oddly, I had already lost my connection to what had been our home and sanctuary for so many years. "Mom just cries all the time and spends hours talking with that jerk John." It was the first time I heard James swear, but I decided not to scold him. I understood exactly how he felt. "Come on, you two. Let's head to my new place and talk." The journey to my house was an unusual one. James stared out of the window with a brooding expression the entire way, while Elaine wept and used a seemingly endless supply of tissues to dry her eyes. In their eagerness to find safety, they almost collided with the front door. Shelley was already there with Patsy, who immediately went to Elaine and gave her a tight hug. "I suppose we're sisters now, huh? I've always wanted a sister, and I'm so glad it's you. I wish it didn't have to be under these circumstances." This made me tear up, and all three women in the room began to sob anew. James seemed to feel excluded, so I put my arm around his shoulder and held him close. "Everything will be okay, James," I said, trying to comfort him. The young man, on the brink of adulthood, nodded and looked away, embarrassed that his tears might be seen. I hugged him properly and, through my own tears, whispered, "You will always be my son, James, no matter what has happened. I'm proud of you, and I'll always be here for you." He cried a bit more, and, in a strained whisper, said, "Thanks, Dad." My heart went out to him, and we continued to hold each other for a long time. Shelley, recognizing the right moment, said cheerfully, "Well, now that the family hugs and tears are over, let's all come to the table and enjoy some real family food." The pizza and drinks she had prepared gave us a chance to take a break and regain our composure. We spent a relaxing afternoon lounging in the backyard. Although we didn't mention the strange reasons for our gathering, there was plenty of joking about new siblings. Shelley and I were amazed at how well the kids were blending, but we were also acutely aware that I wasn't their biological father, and she wasn't the biological mother of James and Elaine. The few glances of quiet sadness we shared were overshadowed by the happiness that we had experienced together so recently. As it turned out, night fell and Shelley and Patsy went home, leaving me alone with Elaine and James. I asked, "Did you let your mom know you were staying here?" I wanted to avoid the possibility of police coming over looking for missing kids. "Yeah," James replied. "We left her a note and asked her not to call us too." Anger began to show in his voice again. I knew I needed to help him reconcile with Ellie, or this anger would consume him. "Elaine, James, I know you're both hurting. Believe me, my anger at this situation nearly overwhelmed me. I even considered ending it all, but the thought of you two kept me going. What your mom did, she did mostly to me. She pledged her marriage to me and betrayed me more than anyone else. But she's still your mother, and once things calm down and you have time to reflect, you'll remember she was a wonderful mom to both of you. Her acts of betrayal and deceit haven't changed her love and care for you until now. Don't let this one incident erase all the years of happiness you've had." They were listening, but there was also a reluctance to show any respect for their mother. Elaine spoke up. "I know, Dad, if I can still call you that. I'm so angry about what she did to you. I feel your pain as if it were my own, alongside the hurt from her betrayal. Listen to me, both of you. I may not be your biological father, but there's no doubt that I'm your dad. My relationship with you will remain unchanged. My relationship with your mother, however, is another matter entirely. I'll always be here for you, just as I was before. The living arrangements might be a bit different, I chuckled, but I'll still be here for you. I paused, thinking, Yoda to the rescue. Now, enough talking for tonight. Go pick out your room if you decide to stay here. It might not be as fancy as our old place, but I intend to make it feel like home. Now go, and good night. I love you both. They settled in for the night. I needed to do the same. This emotional roller coaster was taking a serious toll on me, both mentally and physically. Plus, I'm not as young as I used to be, and the events with Shelley last night had left me nearly exhausted. I wondered how Shelley was feeling. That was my last thought before I drifted off to sleep. The next morning during breakfast, I persuaded them to talk to Ellie. She had clearly been worried sick about them, but through their strained conversation, the kids made it clear that they would only return home if that jerk was nowhere in sight. They firmly stated that they wanted nothing to do with John. I didn't know if John was staying with Ellie, but she agreed to their terms. I drove them home just before lunch and checked to make sure there were no unfamiliar vehicles around. Fortunately, my arrangement with the mechanic who had been looking at Ellie's car for so long was complete, and she now had her car back. The kids went inside after much hugging, and I promised them that I'd be available any time. They had my number. I was about to get back to work, hoping the kids would reconcile with Ellie. As Ellie started to come out of the house, the kids went in. Al, we need to... I didn't let her finish. I closed my window and quickly backed out of the driveway. There was no way I was going to engage in any conversation with her at that moment, even though I knew I would eventually need to, for the sake of the kids. I would have to speak with my lawyer again. Jane was very straightforward when I met her. Al, as tough as it may sound, John has all the rights to your children. And when I say your children, I mean it metaphorically. After all, he is their biological father. As unfair as it seems, the law is the law. Elaine is legally independent now, being 19. She can live with whoever she chooses, or even alone. James, on the other hand, is 14. The law requires him to have a guardian until he's 16. You and Ellie will need to work something out, but she isn't obligated to let you take care of James. She's his mother, and John is his legal father. In this situation, you're the outsider. Though I was aware of all this, hearing it spoken out loud only deepened my despair. She continued, Let's allow the divorce to proceed and deal with things as they come. The divorce went through its course, and as expected, no child support was requested. I received 40% of the family assets, which surprised Jane, as she expected I would get much less. Elaine moved in with me permanently, but occasionally spent nights with Ellie. A quiet, uneasy truce had been established between them. I was glad for Elaine, but I was still furious that it seemed Ellie had come out ahead in this mess. John was living in our old house with Ellie and James, but knew to stay away when Elaine was there. He had somehow managed to buy a high-end apartment for when he wasn't with Ellie. Elaine told me that James had become a real recluse, nearly staying in his room all the time. He wouldn't eat with Ellie and John, only emerging from his shell when Elaine was around. His relationship with Ellie was strained. He barely managed to be civil, speaking only in one-word, disinterested replies. He didn't talk to John at all. Combined with typical teenage rebellion, he was a ticking time bomb. I'm really worried about him, Dad, Elaine confided one day. If he doesn't settle down soon, he might do something he'll regret for the rest of his life. He's hanging out with the wrong crowd at school and causing trouble for his teachers. My friends at school say his grades have plummeted. What can we do, Dad? I looked at my daughter sadly. Lainey, I've done everything I can, but the justice system is stacked against us. Legally, he's not my child, and I have no authority over him. But I have other plans, I said with a conspiratorial glint in my eye. Elaine listened and smiled as I explained my plans. He was going to face a lot of pain, and by the time I was finished with him, he might want to leave town for good. I had uncovered some information through somewhat underhanded methods, though not too extreme, as the private investigator was well compensated for his work. It turns out that John had been less than transparent about his assets during his divorce from Shelley. He had kept an offshore account and had been funneling money into it for years. This explained how he managed to buy that apartment so effortlessly after his divorce. The detective couldn't determine the source of this money initially. He had started the account with a substantial deposit of $200,000 from a distant relative, which he never disclosed to the court. However, the detective was able to confirm that the current balance was around $1 million. "And that jerk is leeching off Ellie," I fumed. "I bet he hasn't mentioned this to her either. No wonder he could afford a permanent booking for their getaway without Shelley catching on to the regular payments." The detective also discovered the false name John used for this account to evade scrutiny during the divorce, James Long. That's the alias he chose. What a scoundrel. This private investigator I hired was truly invaluable. I was intrigued by how the detective managed to uncover all this. He speculated that John must access the account through his computer or smartphone, as he had no records of visiting foreign banks. John did have a safety deposit box at a local bank, but rarely visited it. This situation was becoming more fascinating by the minute. Elaine was on board and probably even more eager than I was to expose the bastard. Elaine was determined to uncover how the jerk accessed his profitable offshore accounts. She began spending more time with Ellie, which meant the jerk was frequently away from home. This became increasingly frustrating for him because each time he left, he had to take all his personal belongings, including his computer. Eventually, he became careless and left his PC at Ellie's place. This was the opportunity Elaine and I had been waiting for. She called me as soon as she realized her chance. "Dad, he's left and I have his laptop. What should I do now? I don't know his password or anything," she said breathlessly. "I'll pick you up in 15 minutes, I replied, "but make sure your mother doesn't know you're leaving or the jerk will be back." She told Ellie that she was going to her room and needed to be undisturbed for at least 3 hours. That was all we needed. We had about 2.5 hours to get our hands on the jerk. Elaine met me a few blocks from our old house, and I immediately drove to an address I had researched weeks earlier. I didn't know the person at this address, but I had emailed him about a job I needed done. When I knocked on the door, it was answered by an unshaven, pimply kid who looked about 20 years old. "What do you want, Gramps?" he asked through the slightly open door. "Forget the Gramps stuff, kid," I replied. "I'm Al, and I set this up a while ago. Are we on or not?" He hesitated but let us in when he saw Elaine behind me. "So, can you do what you said you could, or are you just bluffing?" I asked. "Take it easy, old man," he said. "Just give me an hour, and this laptop will be working for us." He took the laptop and connected various USB and HDMI cables, though I didn't know what for. All I knew was that he promised to unlock any password-protected files on the hard drive. That was why I was here. He wasn't cheap, but if he succeeded, my plan to get back at the jerk would succeed as well. While he hummed and mumbled to himself, Elaine and I surveyed the apartment. This was not a life I could endure. The place was a mess, cluttered with scattered tech equipment and leftover pizza in various spots. The only comfortable seat was in front of a large monitor setup, currently displaying the login screen of the jerk's laptop and some scrolling code. After about 40 minutes, the tech guy exclaimed, "Bingo! We're in!" The home login screen changed to the jerk's desktop. We quickly accessed his web browser and examined his bookmarks, finding one labeled Bank of Greece, buried a couple of layers deep. We clicked on it, and the login screen for the website appeared, with the usual scrolling code on the tech guy's monitors. About 50 minutes later, the login screen auto-filled with characters. We had his login credentials. I logged in and discovered his account details, $900,000 plus some change. I transferred all but $10 to an account I'd set up in the name of C. Heaters. I wondered if he would get the hint. We then searched his hard drive, and found the details for the safety deposit box. After noting these, I paid the tech guy and left. We had a limited window to return the jerk's laptop. Elaine came back and replaced the laptop, then told Ellie she was leaving again. We waited around the corner and saw the jerk driving back to Ellie's almost immediately after Elaine left. Wow, that was fast, I thought. He must have been pretty nearby. Back at my house, I took a moment to reflect on the situation. The guy must have been involved in some shady activities to accumulate that much cash. He was just an ordinary accountant. I was flooded with questions about how and why he managed to hide the money offshore while leading a seemingly normal suburban life. There must be a reason for his secrecy. But who was he hiding it from? With the tax authorities securing deals with most international banks to prevent citizens from hiding money overseas, he must have known that sooner or later the government would discover it. If my private detective could find it so easily, the government certainly could too. This needed further investigation. Perhaps the safety deposit box would provide some answers. This is where Elaine came to the rescue. I was back to full-time teaching, so my time for investigations was limited. She went to the bank in the city where the box was located. Armed with all the security passwords from the accountant's computer, she hoped it would be sufficient. If it were me, a middle-aged man, they would probably question me thoroughly. But Elaine, being a nearly 20-year-old beauty, dressed impeccably, and knew how to use her charm. As I watched my daughter grow up, I felt a pang of regret for her lost childhood. Nevertheless, her charm worked. She managed to navigate the initial layer of security by spinning a story about her stepfather being in the hospital. The combination of passwords and her story was enough to get her through. When she opened the box, it only contained accounting journals and an envelope full of smaller items. Not wanting to push her luck, she quickly put everything into her handbag and left the bank. As she exited, she made sure to flash a sweet smile and slightly bend over in front of the security guard, pretending to check her bag. The guard caught a glimpse of her cleavage, which would surely be a lasting memory for him. When I got home from school that afternoon, the contents of the box were spread out on my kitchen table. Elaine was there, looking pale and extremely anxious. "Dad, you won't believe what was in the box. Look at this," she said, handing me 2 passports. The first one was for someone named Bruce Williams, an Australian passport. The second passport had a typical photo of Ellie, but was issued under the name Anne Williams, Mrs. Anne Williams, and was also an Australian passport. What the hell? I realized my daughter was present. It seems like he was planning some kind of escape. He intended to disappear with your mother, Elaine. The divorces must have disrupted their plans for a while. Look at this. 2 one-way plane tickets with Qantas from LA to Sydney, scheduled for 2 weeks from now. Surely your mother wasn't in on this. She might have done some foolish things, but I can't believe she would just leave you and James behind. There's more to this. Elaine was stunned by the revelations, but kept going through the envelope's contents scattered across the table. "Dad, check out this photo. It shows the person I've been calling Jerk when he was about my age. Look closely." I examined the photo and instantly recognized the person. It was from our university days, showing the Jerk looking very sophisticated and self-assured. Next to him was another student I remembered. It suddenly hit me who it was. Holy shit! I momentarily forgot about my daughter. That's Jimmy Lamont. He was the son of the notorious gang boss Al Lamont. Nobody liked him at university. He flaunted his money, harassed any woman he was interested in, and even had students beaten up if they crossed him. So, Jerk was close friends with him. He must have kept it well hidden, because I never noticed any signs of it. And come to think of it, I didn't see any signs of him being close with your mother at university either. I must have been incredibly naive. After examining most of the envelope's contents, I focused on the journals. They appeared to be ordinary accounting ledgers. Nothing exciting. The entries revealed routine cash deposits and withdrawals into an account under the name J. Lamont. He must have been managing the books for this criminal figure, I said. The other journal was more enigmatic. It only showed deposits, except for one very large withdrawal recently. The apartment, I realized. The account was actually under the name James Long, the same one we had just raided. Either this person was being paid $10,000 regularly for his covert bookkeeping, or he had stolen money from Jimmy's account. Either way, the pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together. Elaine, we've stirred up a hornet's nest. This could spell major trouble for us if we're caught, but especially for that jerk and your mother. I don't care about that jerk at all, but your mother is a different story. I know I despise her, excuse me, Laney, but I wouldn't wish her dead. This crime family is rumored to deal decisively with anyone who crosses them. We need to be very careful. Elaine's face went pale again. Do you think they know it was us? She whispered. I shared the same concern. I hope not, I replied. We needed to cover our tracks as quickly as possible. I took the journals to school and asked my teacher's aide to make 2 copies of them. I also copied the passports. Elaine returned the originals to the safety deposit box. However, I kept Ellie's fake passport and her flight voucher. This time, the young security guard smiled sweetly at Elaine and stared eagerly at the beauty before him, but to no avail. Elaine and I went over the situation thoroughly. Her mother was in serious danger. If Al Lamont discovered that the jerk was stealing from him, the jerk wouldn't have much time left. Unfortunately, Ellie could become collateral damage. She needed to separate from him immediately to sever any connection between them. Not a chance, I thought bitterly. They've been having an affair and living a secret life behind my back for longer than my marriage to Ellie. The jerk had to be dealt with, and Ellie had to vanish. 1 copy of the journals had to be slipped into Al's mailbox. Ellie needed to disappear under her alias as quickly as possible. Now, how to convince her? I called her, and she took a while to pick up, probably wondering why I was calling her since I had consistently ignored her calls since our divorce. Alan. This is unexpected, she answered hesitantly. Ellie, we need to talk urgently. It's about James, I lied. No questions right now, but meet me at the Coffee Bean in 15 minutes. I hung up before she could ask anything. When she arrived, she was visibly pale. What's this about, Alan? She asked. Has something happened to James? What has he done? I motioned for her to sit, then placed her fake passport on the table, open. She looked at it and, upon recognizing her picture, quickly looked back up at me. What is this, Alan? What are you doing? This isn't my passport. Where did you get it? I let her finish her questions, noting that she seemed as shocked as I was by the fake document. Without saying a word, I placed the 2 original flight tickets on the table. It seems like the jerk wanted you both to disappear, Mrs. Williams. She turned even paler. What? How? I would never leave my kids. I know they've been a nightmare since our divorce, Alan, but I still love them. They're John's kids, too. He wouldn't just abandon them. As she said the last part, she bit her tongue, the first time she had openly admitted that the kids weren't mine. You're actually defending that cheating bastard? My anger was rising. The lying, conniving jerk who willingly betrayed me with your help for over 19 years. You expect me to believe he has any moral integrity? I was shouting by now, and other patrons were clearly noticing. Ellie had never seen me this furious before, and it frightened her. I'm leaving, she declared. As she began to stand up, I placed the journals on the table. What are those? She asked. More fake documents? I urged her to examine them closely. She immediately recognized what they were, having always managed our finances. Ellie, I said more calmly, it seems that this jerk has been cheating on you as well. He's been stealing from the wrong person. While there's a certain satisfaction in that from my perspective, it doesn't offer me any solace. This so-called gentleman, John, aka Jerk, hasn't just been betraying you behind my back all these years. He's also been financially screwing over Al Lamont during the same period. I'm sure Al will find out soon about his activities, and if you're still involved with him or around him, well, Let's just say you could be in serious trouble. From all his cronies and their associates, and if you don't end up in some Mexican brothel as the white flavor of the month, you might find yourself in the Mexican desert 6 feet under. I let that sink in. Though I didn't think it was possible, she looked even paler. The other patrons were clearly concerned. Noticing Ellie's distress, a waitress approached her. "Are you okay, ma'am? Can I get you anything?" When Ellie didn't respond, the waitress left, puzzled. "Ellie, I won't beat around the bush. You need to leave for Australia immediately. Use the fake passport and flight voucher. Get out without a trace. The Lamonts know you've been with that jerk for a long time." I felt a surge of anger at how these two had deceived me for so long. "You need to sign over custody of James and transfer the house to James and Elaine in trust. I have the papers here." I placed the yellow envelope on the table. "Let me be clear, Ellie. I'm offering you a way out, not because I still have feelings for you. Actually, I do have feelings for you." She looked at me in surprise. "Alan, she began, but I interrupted her. "The feelings I have for you are pure, unfiltered hate and disgust. I can't comprehend how you could betray me, our marriage, and our children. You treated my love and respect with utter contempt. I'm offering you this opportunity because you're the mother of James and Elaine, and I love them dearly. They deserve to have their mother alive, not dead somewhere in Mexico after being used and abused. I couldn't care less about that jerk. I hope he ends up in some desert in Mexico. Now, sign the papers and leave the country and our lives. This is your last chance." Ellie picked up the papers, read them, and signed. "Alan, this means I have no claim on my children," she sobbed. "Welcome to the club. Now you know how I felt when I discovered your long-term deceit." I stood up and left the cafe. The patrons collectively sighed with relief but still glanced at the sobbing woman. The next day, James arrived at my house with all his belongings. "Hey, Dad. What's going on?" "Mum left a note saying I should come here and that I'd be staying for a while. Most of her stuff is gone. It's like she's not coming back." I looked at James, my James, and smiled. "It's okay, son. Everything will be explained soon. Go ahead and unpack." Elaine rushed in, hugged her brother, and helped him with his things. 2 days later, the papers reported the sudden disappearance of John Jefferson, a recently divorced local resident. There were rumors linking him to a notorious crime figure, and investigations were ongoing. On the following page, there was an article about a mysterious house fire. We recognized the address. It was our old house. Apparently, the fire resulted from a botched robbery, and the house had been thoroughly ransacked before being set ablaze. James and Elaine continued to live in my house until Elaine started university. Coincidentally, her sister, Patsy, also attended the same university. Shelley sold her house and moved in with us. We were relieved that James often went to bed with his earphones on, listening to his favorite bands. The money remained in our offshore account and would stay there until needed. After all, teachers don't earn that much.